Hello and welcome to the video. This is the first video in a brand new quad building series. This is going to be series 7, built off this frame here, the brand new Armattan Chameleon TI. This is the updated version of the Chameleon, and you'll notice there's quite a few different changes on it as well. So in this video, first of all, I'd like to introduce you to all the parts that I intend to use to build this quadcopter out to something that's going to fly around. And secondly, I would like to spend a little bit of time just giving some tips and tricks of this frame and show you how it goes together. And that will mean for those of you that are either looking at this new Chameleon or the Rooster frame that I've already looked at on the channel, you can kind of make your mind up. Big difference now really is whether or not you want a one-piece base plate or you want separate arms, because everything else is very, very similar. But let me go onto the bench and show you all of the different pieces that I'm going to put together to make this quadcopter as part of this series. Now again, if you have never built a quadcopter before, go and have a look at the quadcopter building for beginners. I've got 2 series of that on the channel, and I've got lots of other build series with different components. But here are the bits that I want to use for this one. First thing we'll talk about then is the flight controller. The flight controller is one that I've not used before, but I've heard rave reviews. This is the CL Racing F4S. This is the very latest version. A couple of people talked about having problems with specific ESCs with some older revisions. This is the new revision, version 1.4, that has some additional protection on board, so it should work with all ESCs now. So I'm interested in putting that together because it looks like a very simple one to wire up. Next thing to look at then are the ESCs. These are 35 amp BL Heli ESCs from Sabotage RC. Oh, let me pop a link down below while I think about it. And these should be nice out on the arms because they're really, really small considering they're 35 amps. So I'm probably going to make sure there's lots of airflow around those, keep them nice and cool. The camera is a little bit different from ones that I've used before. The camera is a special edition of a camera that I really like that's already installed on that Rooster quadcopter that I talked about at the beginning of the video. But this is a specific one built and tuned for Armattan. Now the cool thing is this camera can also be controlled directly from your radio. You can access the on-screen display and do everything because this camera has the latest firmware. And for those of you that have older quadcopters with other versions of this camera, you'll probably be aware that the Betaflight on-screen display stuff doesn't work very well with it. The cool thing is it does with this, so that's something that I can set up, show you how to do that as part of this build. The Predator Mini is a great camera, and this special edition with the updated firmware is going to make it even better. Got some mounting hardware for the flight controller. I'm going to use this video transmitter from FXT. We looked at some stuff from FXT a couple of weeks ago, and I like this because it's kind of going to fit nicely in the chassis, and it's a smart audio capable video transmitter, so I'm going to be able to also configure it, power settings and all that goodness from the Betaflight on-screen display as well. Motors on this, now I've been waiting for a build to try these out. I think these are very pretty. I've not used these before, so I'm interested to see how they perform, but if the looks of them are anything to go by, they should work very nicely. Windings don't look too bad, air gap's pretty good, the bearings feel nice, so we'll try these Eagle Power 2306 2888 kV motors. And then we're on to the star of the show really, which is the Armattan Chameleon TI frame. So let me just very quickly take this out of the packet and let me show you how this thing goes together. And then when we come into the next video, we can start putting all of the power system, the motors, ESCs, the flight controller and everything else onto it. Now, just before I pull it out of the bag, here is that Rooster that we were looking at. So this is the version of the frame that Armattan do that's very similar to this Chameleon frame. It has the same titanium cage, but this time it has these separate arms. So it really boils down to whether or not you want a single piece of boss and carbon or whether you want the 4 individual arms. So as we get into the packet, we have a bag of bits. We have the bottom plate, which is a one-piece plate, which the Chameleon has always had. And then we have our little instruction booklet too. The instructions are really simple to follow. There's not many steps at all. You can probably figure it out without the instructions, but I'm going to go through and very quickly show you how to build this. My pro tip is just be really careful with the length of all the bolts. All of these are M3 bolts, and they all are accessed and opened using the same 2mm hex driver. So it's just like the rooster. You don't need lots and lots of tools, which is one of the big changes on this new version of the frame. So let me take you through each of these steps and I'll show you how to put it together. It takes about 10 minutes. So let me just open this bag of bits, because this is where all the goodness is, including all the titanium pieces, the screws, washers, bolts, rubber bits and pieces. We have the same clear guides for the rear for the antennas that the rooster had. We have an Armattan branded battery strap. The front cage pieces, they're all the metal bits, and also the supports for the rear part. And then we have a very big bag which is absolutely full of all the other little bits and pieces, and they're all segmented into the right lengths. And again, my pro tip is just be a bit careful and make sure you're using the right length in the right place. Just double check it. And then we have the other carbon fiber parts, and then once you've got that open, you're ready to start building. Job one is to install the supports for the flight controller and to install the two sides of the cage with the little spacer that goes underneath it as well. Now, when I'm doing a build, particularly when it's a new build, I tend to use one of these little magnetic trays and put all the pieces in, just like if I was building IKEA furniture, and then I can go through it. So job one is going to be install these little dog bone pads, and that will then become the underside of the frame. Take your time doing this, try and get them equally spaced. There isn't any markings on the arm, so put them where you want to. Now, as my ESCs are going to be towards the inside of the frame, and I'm going to have cable tie around them to keep them in position, I'll put these dog bones out towards the ends of the arms near the motors, and that will also provide maximum stability as well. Next job then is to get hold of 4 M3 by 60mm bolts and put them through the bottom plate, and then there are 2 sets of nylon mounting hardware. There's an M3 6mm nylon standoff that screws onto the bolt, and then on top of that is an M3 nylon nut. Just work your way around and pop all those on, and that will be the flight controller mounting hardware done. Grab yourself the spacer that's going to provide the additional support for the 2 sides of the titanium cage. Pop the titanium cage on. It's a little bit tricky. The tolerances are really nice here, so it isn't going to grab onto it. It just fits beautifully. Once it's in place, grab yourself 2 of the 12mm bolts and pop those underneath to keep the cage in place. Next part in the build is step 2, and that is going to be building out the rear assembly, which is going to be the support for the video transmitter antenna and also for the guides for the receiver antennas as well. Now, all of those are electrically isolated, and this is probably the hardest part of the entire build, getting these blooming little grommets into these little holes. I'd recommend that you hold them in your hand for a couple of minutes so the rubber or whatever it is these things are made out of, silicone, gets nice and warm, and when it's a little bit more pliable you can kind of post it through the hole almost like you're posting a letter, and once you've got enough out the back you can grab it with your fingernails and pull it through. It is a bit fiddly. Take your time and don't use anything sharp to try and push these through. If you do, then you'll damage them and there aren't any spares in the kit. Next job then is to install the large grommet that is going to electrically isolate the video transmitter's antenna connection as well. Again, that just is a push fit, and then there are 2 nylon washers each side. That goes either side of the mount, but we won't use those until we actually put the VTX into the model. So for now, just keep them in a safe place. Put the whole thing together with the little M3 by 6 bolts, and then bolt the whole finished assembly to the rear of the model using the M3 by 10 bolts. You get quite a few spares in all the bolts, so if you drop one it disappears in the carpet. Don't panic too much, but do make sure that you are tightening these things up. This is metal into metal, so if you really wanted to, if you had some thread lock, you could pop a little dab onto it. I found that with the rooster nothing's coming undone, but if you have thread lock there's nothing to stop you putting a little bit on. The other pro tip for putting this thing together is be very careful when you're assembling the back cage. It's easy to get one of the pieces upside down. Double check to make sure that both of the upright pieces that are made of metal are the right way round. If they're not the right way round, then one of them will be slightly proud at the top. So just double check that. It's not completely clear in the instructions, and I managed to get one of mine upside down. Next job then is to attach the two top deck pieces. One is the camera plate and the other is the top deck. The foam pads for both the camera and the battery as well don't come pre-installed, so just take your time lining it up. The holes are exactly the same size, so once you're completely happy it's lined up, just put some firm pressure on the back to make sure the adhesive is on, and then use M3x4 bolts to connect the camera plate and use M3x6 bolts to connect this top deck onto the main part of the model. And again, this is just like the rooster. By undoing the 4 bolts, you can take the top deck off and you've got access to all the electronics inside the model. So it's a nice, cute design. Last bit to do then is to install the 28.6mm standoff. This is going to go between the titanium parts to provide that extra rigidity and form the completed camera cage. You just put that onto the model with a couple of the M3x10 bolts. Again, just make sure everything is nipped up. So there we are, done, built. Very simple and straightforward, very strong. And this new Chameleon is definitely taking all of the improvements and design cues from the Rooster over the first edition of the Chameleon, which didn't have the titanium frame. The last comment I'll make here, every part of the build that I've done with this frame have been done with the same 2mm hex driver. So that's going to be great at the field. Everything can be taken apart using exactly the same tool that I take to maintain the Rooster as well. But hopefully now it's all together, you can see the family resemblance. Its backside looks exactly the same, so does its front and cage. So it is really down to whether or not you like the idea of having separate arms or you like a one-piece bottom plate. So join me in the next video. We'll start putting all of that technology onto the frame. As usual, we'll test mount the flight controller, pop the ESCs and motors on, and start having a look how we're going to wire everything up. If you found that video useful or like the content, then please hit the like and subscribe button down below. If you want to go the extra step, you can become a Patreon of the Painless 360 channel and help provide support for what I do here. All the videos created here are put into playlists, so if you're interested in a particular topic, have a look at the playlist, and they all are organised in there to make them easier to use. If you're not sure if there's a video for your particular problem or topic you want to know more about, then add Painless 360 to the Google search term that you're interested in, and that should find the video, article or content about the particular thing that you're interested in having a look at.